Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this presentation in the Instructional Design and Analytics track. I'm Martin Ramsey of the LAMP Consortium, and I'll be the moderator for this session. If you have questions for our presenter, please type them in the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get to them as we have time. And I should also say that this session is being recorded, and the slides have already been uploaded to the conference site by our presenter, so you'll have access to that. But our presenter today is Angela Laughlin. Unfortunately, Michelle Smith was unable to join us today, but Angela is currently an associate professor of English and co-director of women's studies at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. She teaches in the areas of literature and gender, digital writing, and technical communication, and she's going to talk to us today about how she is using site statistics within Sakai to understand how students access writing feedback. So, Angela, welcome, and let's hear from you.
All right, thank you very much. I just want to confirm you can hear me okay?
We hear you fine.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, well, thank you for attending the session today. I'm really excited to share a bit about our project, and I'm speaking on behalf of Michelle as well as myself there. I thought I would start by just kind of giving an overview of our project and some background on it, and so I'm going to go advance to that slide. Okay, here we go. So, so just a little bit of background about just kind of some of the related information about writing instruction. So writing instructors spend on average between 20 and 40 minutes writing comments on and grading each individual student paper, which means that we spend a lot of our time grading individual papers. But regardless of how much time we spend, an open question within the field of rhetoric and composition has been whether students take the time to look at that feedback. Although this question has been the subject of debate and study for almost 4 decades, in a traditional classroom and with hard copy papers, it has proven pretty much impossible to accurately determine whether students even look at instructor feedback, let alone use it to improve their writing. Until now, scholars have had to rely on surveys, interviews, and artificial test conditions to try to ascertain what students do once instructors return feedback on their writing. With the help of tools provided by learning management systems, or LMSs, an answer to this important question is now within reach. So today I want to share about how we use the site statistics tool provided by Sakai to better understand how frequently students access instructor feedback attachments on their writing. I'm going to describe how we use the site statistics tool to conduct our study and the implications of our findings for teachers of writing and writing-intensive courses. I thought I'd start by giving some background to this project to help explain why our discovery, the kind of in quotes discovery of the site statistics tool was so important. I've been grading online since 2007 in both my traditional as well as my fully online classes. At Marist College, where Michelle and I teach, our instance of Sakai is called iLearn. So you will hear me refer to iLearn throughout the presentation because that's how I think of it. We both teach literature and writing courses, and obviously both types of classes are very writing intensive, and so we spend a lot of time assigning writing, collecting writing, and responding to writing. And so from the beginning, I was very excited to try out the different grading mechanisms in iLearn. I was interested in this as a way to move toward a more paperless classroom, but also because I liked the fact that I didn't have to worry later about losing a student's paper, or when they submitted it, I would know exactly what time they submitted it. And over the years, I've tried a wide variety of ways of collecting writing as well as responding to it, but I've kind of ended up primarily using the assignments tool, and I just wanted to show 3 different ways of the most common ways that I have used to respond to writing. So in this first version, I used the grade box to provide the numerical score, and then I attached a feedback file, and then I used the text box to point students to the feedback file for marginal and in comments on their writing. In the second option, I don't use the grade box. I just indicate that assignments have been checked, and then the grade or the score and the feedback is all included in the attached feedback file. And again, I use the text box to just point students to the feedback file. And then in the third option, I've used the grade box to give them their score. Their marginal comments are in the attached feedback file, and then I post my summary or end comment in the text box. I've used this method least often because it's just a little more complicated. It requires extra steps, and so I've just tended not to use it. But one thing that's always bothered me is that I could never really find any data indicating which of these methods was any more effective than any other method, or even some alternative method that I hadn't even tried. I always just felt like I was kind of groping around, doing whatever seemed easiest to me. I could find lots of information provided about like how to attach a file or how to use a text box, but I couldn't find anything about the difference that these would make, especially to students. So eventually I decided that I should just work on developing some best practices for responding to student writing in LMSs, since I couldn't really find them in especially the literature and from rhetoric and composition. And at that point I recruited Michelle to work with me. I somehow convinced her to take this project on, and so we began talking about how to design a research study. One of the most important reasons for doing this research is that commenting on student writing online is not the same as commenting on printed papers. The literature on response makes clear that instructors and students are often divided about the value of the different components of response, with instructors attributing the most value and obviously time to written feedback on student writing, while students describe finding the most value from the grades that their writing receives. Both grades and written feedback constitute ways that teachers respond to student writing, but they serve different functions. So grades primarily serve to, help evaluate a student over the course of an entire semester, and just to give them a grade. While feedback refers to written annotations and comments on finalized assignments submitting for grading, and this is where most instructors feel like they have the opportunity to help students improve their writing for the future. The amount of time that instructors spend writing comments on graded papers indicates how important we tend to feel that feedback is as a way to help students. But as I was mentioning, research on response has long recognized that instructors and students generally disagree about the relative importance of grades and feedback. One scholar, Eric Carlos, has explained that many instructors share the belief that students are only interested in the marks and do not generally engage instructor feedback. This information about grading a response has important implications when you're grading online, because LMS interfaces in general have two significant differences from traditional classrooms. So first, these interfaces provide a way to separate grading from feedback in a way that is not typical of traditional classrooms, and in fact, it's often the default. So you tend to be encouraged to use the grade box and the grade book, and you kind of almost like have to disable them if you're not going to use them. And then second, while students can generally view their score on an assignment very easily after logging in, they actually have to take extra steps to view the feedback. So this means that it's easy and possible for them to view their grades without ever having to see instructor feedback. Writing instructors have generally or traditionally been able to count on the fact that when we would pass back a paper, even if students only cared about their grade, they would at least have to see that there were comments on the paper. They would have to flip through the paper. We usually will sort of hide the grade on the last page, so they have to flip through the paper to find it. And maybe there's this hope that they will see the comments and be motivated to read them. But because if you use the grade box, they don't have to do this in an LMS. This is kind of an unprecedented separation of grading and feedback. And so our initial research question was just what impact is that having on the way that they access our feedback. So we were specifically interested in just kind of comparing these two different modes of grading. So the one being use of the grade box to give them the numerical score, and the other being only telling them that it's been checked and then sort of forcing them to look in the attached feedback file for their grade. Our initial inclination when thinking about how to explore this issue was to replicate research methods that have been used to study the same question in traditional classrooms. There have been numerous studies of response focused on instructors as well as students, and they've generally employed methods such as surveys, interviews, and artificial test conditions, such as like giving students papers and then that have been graded and kind of seeing what they do, or doing that with instructors. And these studies have been fruitful, and they have led to the development of a whole series of best practices. I'm not going to read through all of these best practices, but I wanted to just include them because these are strategies that like basically all writing teachers are taught while they're learning how to teach writing. And if you just even kind of glance through them, you can see that there's really nothing in these best practices that would help someone make a kind of shift from a traditional classroom to digital grading. It's just not even acknowledged. And so that's kind of what I kept running into when I was looking for more specific information.
Hey, Angela.
Yes.
I'll interject a quick question. We have a question from Bob that might be applicable here. He says, would using email to communicate grades and comments ensure that the students saw the feedback before the grade? Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of at the end, I'll talk about some of the ways that we definitely can encourage it. Sure.
Good.
So can I kind of put that one on pause for now?
Of course.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to advance to my next slide. No. Oh, yeah, well, I'm sort of here early, but that's okay. So methods that we were planning to sort of use, such as interviewing, surveying, setting up artificial test conditions, these obviously have limitations, and they haven't always proven to yield totally reliable information, but they're the ones that we figured we would just sort of have to use. We plan to ask students questions to determine whether being able to see their grade had any impact on whether they would open an attached feedback file, and we hypothesized that it did have an impact, but we weren't but determining the extent of the impact using surveys and interviews seemed potentially difficult. And so this is where we get to our exciting discovery of the site statistics tool, and because our entire plan changed when we realized we could use this tool. We had been aware of the site statistics tool for a long time, and we'd used it in the past for different reasons, often to determine whether or not a given student had ever logged into a course or to see which files were being downloaded most. We knew that we could access data about which files from the resources or lessons tool were being downloaded, but we had never really tried to access information about specific files that we had returned to students via assignments. I'm just kind of showing here some of the, basically what the interface looks like for the site statistics tool. And so we wondered if iLearn kept a record of which files and assignments were downloaded, and it turned out that iLearn did, and that we could find out who had downloaded a file in assignments along with the dates that the file was downloaded and how many times the file was downloaded. It would be difficult to overstate how important this discovery was to our study, since one limitation of many previous studies of response has been the lack of empirical research on the topic. The data gathered and provided by the site statistics tool is a real boon to researchers interested in observing how students interact with instructor feedback without having to rely on students to just accurately report this information or resorting to artificial test conditions. So iLearn, and you may already know this, but iLearn records each time a student opens an attachment within the assignments tool, and then this makes it possible for us to understand much more about when students do and do not open instructor feedback. And although an important caveat here is that we, of course, can't say what the students are doing once they open the feedback file, it is true that students who don't open it certainly cannot access the instructor feedback, whereas those who do open the attachment have at least access to the feedback, similar to what they would get in a traditional class when they got both their grade and response in a hard copy paper. So now we could begin to get a picture of how students interacted with attached feedback files and whether using the gradebook tool impacted the rate at which students would open attached feedback. And here I'm just showing, this is what a kind of, I made just pretend reports up because I didn't want to have any kind of confidential information shared. So, but this is basically what the report looks like that's returned. And fortunately, in preparation for this study and really just to organize our own files, we had systematically begun naming feedback files years before so that each feedback file had a unique name that was not repeated anywhere else in the course site. So in this case, like it would be like a first paper, so I would number it 1 and then return it to the student with their name. And so this made it easy for the site statistics tool to return reports indicating, who exactly had opened this specific file. I always show up because I always have opened them, but then you can also see the dates that the file was opened and then how many times someone opened it on a given day. And this is what a report looks like if a student has not opened a file, and we get those results a lot too. So in this case, I'm the only person who's opened the file because the student never did. There was obviously, as you can see, still a lot of legwork required in compiling this data so that it could be statistically analyzed, because it was very laborious. But basically, from the moment we discovered that the site statistics tool could return information about specific files, our project took on a new direction. And for the first time, we began. We realized we could start to provide quantitative information to the ongoing study of response. So in our redesigned study, we looked only at first papers submitted for grading, and we compared 2 different methods of responding to student writing in iLearn. We ultimately collected data from 20 of our own courses over a period of 5 years, half of which were fully online courses and half of which were traditional courses that just used iLearn as a supplemental tool. Altogether, we collected data on 405 students. Approximately 3/4 of which were female and 1/4 of which were male. And just moving forward, this slide I've already shown before, although I've sort of put it together here differently, just to kind of show that these are the 2 modes that we compared for our study. So for mode 1, we used both the grade box and the attached feedback file, and then of course the text box directed them to look for comments. And then in mode 2, we didn't post their numeric score. We just indicated that assignment was checked and grades and feedback were available in the attachment. And again, the text box pointed them to that. And we felt that mode 2 more closely approximates the scenario in which response usually occurs in a traditional writing class, so that students get feedback and grade together on one document. However, it is worth noting it's not exactly the same in iLearn because they do have to take additional steps to open the file. So there is a kind of added technical challenge. So what information did this study yield? Well, in the first place, it did reveal an answer to the initial question about whether posting students' numeric scores separately from feedback impacts the rate at which students open feedback files. And here is just a quick overview of the results that we got. As you can see, in mode 1, we had 214 participants and 149 students open the feedback attachment, which meant 70% of them did. And in mode 2, we had 191 participants. 178 of them opened the feedback attachment, and that meant that was 93%. And the difference between mode 1 and mode 2 is statistically significant, which means that this difference was beyond experimental error. So this slide illustrates that the likely range, you can see here the dotted line represents the range, of mode 1 and mode 2 responder rates do not overlap. So with a high degree of confidence, so within 99.9%, our results suggest that, suggest that our results were not within a margin of error. I'm sorry, I keep advancing. I'm going to stop tapping. So actually, I'm going to go back to the previous slide just to kind of look at that one again. What this means is that when students were able to see their grades independent of feedback, a number of them opted not to follow through in accessing the feedback. The fact that so many more students opened the feedback file in Mode 2 does suggest that instructors cannot assume that students will receive their feedback on written assignments if they have posted the students' grades separately. It suggests that instructors should be cautious about using grade boxes and gradebook features or making these visible to students at the same time that they return feedback. Especially given how much time we spend writing the feedback and how important we think it is. It's a little bit worrisome that the interface may make it less likely for students to see feedback if the grade is visible. I'm going to advance to the slide I kept going to earlier, which is one of the surprises that we kind of discovered during our study. It was sort of an unintended finding, was that even in Mode 1, the majority of students continued to open the feedback attachment to view instructor feedback on their writing for the first paper. And so you can see that more than 50% of students in Mode 1 and Mode 2 open the feedback attachments, even even within the margin of error. You can see that Mode 1 was greater than 59% and Mode 2 was greater than 85%. And so we found that kind of surprising. We were expecting maybe them not to be as interested if they could see their grades. So this suggests that the students may be more interested in instructor feedback than we sometimes assume they are, and that they aren't only interested in their grades. Again, we can't really extrapolate what they do with the feedback, but we can at least say that the majority of students did open feedback attachments for the first paper, even if they could view their grades separately, which is an interesting result just for response in general. Another result that we found possibly even more surprising was that some students did not open feedback attachments even to view their grades, which implies at least that some students didn't care about their grade or the feedback. And obviously this wasn't surprising in Mode 1, but in Mode 2 we had 13 students out of 191 did not open the feedback attachment at all. And here we feel like we have to be a little cautious because, of course, there could have been technical challenges involved. But since we were the instructors of the class, we at least know that no one contacted us about technical challenges, so we don't know exactly why they didn't open, but we found that very interesting. Okay. And so the fact that so many more students opened the feedback file in Mode 2 does suggest that instructors cannot assume that students will receive their feedback on written assignments if they've posted the grades separately. It suggests, as I kind of already, this is sort of in summary, but it suggests that instructors should be cautious about using gradebook features or making grades visible to students separate from written feedback. And there are a number of ways that instructors could get around this. So making feedback available in advance of grades, or posting grades within the attachment like we did in Mode 2, or something else that's actually already a best practice is using a talkback where students actually write a reply to their instructor about the feedback that they received, almost to say like, here's what I heard you saying in the feedback that you gave me. But more work is really needed to assess the impact of these different methods. There are definitely different options, but we don't quite know what difference they would make. What is clear is that instructors cannot just assume that students will automatically look for feedback on their writing if they have access to their grade, especially if no follow-up is required. And we did not require any follow-up because we just wanted to test that one feature. So in conclusion, the move to using LMSs for response, whether in fully online, hybrid, or traditional classes, definitely complicates the issue of response, and more work needs to be done to help teachers understand how sometimes very subtle differences in the ways that they use LMS interfaces can have dramatic effects. But our study illustrates that simply using the grade box, as often recommended to instructors learning how to use LMSs, has a significant impact on the rate at which students will access feedback. So it demonstrates the value of doing such research in order to develop a more robust set of best practices. And I think it also illustrates the value of tools such as site statistics that can give us a clearer picture of what has proven to be a very elusive process of response, and how they can aid us as we work to develop these best practices. And that is my presentation. So now we can have discussion and questions. And I think
yeah, we've had several.
Oh, good.
First, let me ask one that's sort of been asked in two different ways by two people, Terry Golightly and Linda, Bythe. I'm not sure of the pronunciation of the last name. Both are thinking about, in mode two, you didn't have a grade per se in Sakai, and so Linda says were grades for mode two entered later into the grade book, and Terry says, what about working with cumulative grade calculations in gradebook if you don't enter the grade for the assignment, which would be in mode two? So
That is, yes, in mode two, we basically disabled the grade book, so we did not use the grade book, and that is what is so annoying about mode two, because we felt we could have entered them later, but we both just kind of entered them in Excel and did our calculations that way. So we felt like we lost a lot of the functionality um, of Sakai, through not being able to use that tool.
right. Okay. Well, that's yeah. So what you sacrificed for the research, right?
Yeah, well, we did, but we felt like, in a way, basically, because we were trying to do a very controlled kind of comparison, but otherwise we would have had to go in and enter them later, I think.
Yeah, right. Okay.
We could have done that.
So Bob's got a question here. He says, was there any correlation between the students who didn't open the attachments and students who were otherwise not engaged with the course? That is, was the analytic diagnostic in any way?
You know what? I haven't looked at it that closely because partially because they're my students already. I've done everything I can to kind of anonymize the data as much as possible.
Good
So
point.
do you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
haven't tried to go in and put certain results with certain students. In all cases, we looked at it well after the semester was over. And yeah, that would be very interesting. We also wanted to kind of look at grades, like who had received different grades. But so far we haven't gotten very far with that question
Well, in
yet.
fact, that's a question from Neil. He says, was there any correlation between those that used mode two and the student's final grade of the course?
You mean in terms did students in one particular mode get higher grades?
Oh, well,
I have
I guess that's actually the way the question Neil has asked the question. I was thinking, forgive me, Neil, I'm going to ask a second question on top of yours. Neil said, was there any correlation between those that used mode two and the student's final grade? So does a differentiation between mode one and mode two in terms of grade in the course. But I'm curious about those who didn't, the 13 who says, I don't really care what my grade is. Was there a correlation between that and their final grade?
I have not looked at that yet.
Okay.
That's kind of like a next step in the project, is to actually start looking at grades. But so far we have actually focused more on gender. We're sort of working on the gender issue right now, and just the modes themselves.
Right. Well, in fact, that was a question I was going to ask: is did you notice any gender differences?
There was a gender difference, and unfortunately I don't have the data right in front of me because I didn't have time to talk about it today.
Yeah.
But yes, there was a difference, and it was, again, statistically significant that the women opened at a much higher rate than the men did, even for the first paper.
We guys don't really care,
Yeah. We didn't have as many men, though, and that's one reason we have to be a little more cautious about drawing conclusions,
Right.
because our confidence isn't quite as high. It to 99%, but at about 80-85%, we can say there's a difference between men and women.
Interesting. Okay. You might like this one. Linda, it's not a question. She's made a statement here. She says, we have found really good results with faculty doing a narrated video critique of student papers. Students almost always open the video and watch it, and we can follow how many views of the video.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yep.
I would just love to read more about that.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. So I'll say the two of you should get in touch with each other.
Yeah, that may be, in fact, maybe the problem is that we're trying to kind of use these sort of old-fashioned methods to grade. Maybe need to be using the technology to just grade in a different way. I think that would be sort of logical.
Yeah. Okay. Linda's added quite a bit more here too that I'll copy to you and send to you.
Good.
Let me ask another question because I realize we're running a little bit low on time here. We just have a few more minutes, so if you have other questions, folks, send them in now. But I was wondering if part of this might be an artifact of the fact that this is the first assignment that you had given them. What if my perception is that because it's the first one, I better open it and see what this professor is really like when she grades. But by the time I'm on to the third or fourth assignment, I don't care. I wonder if your numbers would go down considerably and what they
Yes, in fact, in the study that we're working on for publication, we compare first and last papers, and in the last papers, in both modes, it is no longer a majority of students.
Yeah, I feared that was the case.
Yeah. It's still much, much higher in mode 2, but it is no longer above 50%.
All right, very interesting. All right, I think we have time for one more question. See if we've got anything else here. Nothing's coming in. Okay, very good. Well, we're basically out of time. These 30 minutes they go lightning fast, don't they?
Yes, thank you so much.
This has been fascinating, Angela. I'll tell everybody that Angela and I sort of got together, but I didn't know the results of her research, so I'm quite excited about this. This was really good. And Angela has already uploaded her slides, so if you want to see that, and then of course this meeting has been recorded, so you can review it later too. So Angela, thanks very, very much. This was really marvelous, and we will move on to our next session now.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.